Welcome to the first episode of this column all about the monetary system, in which we will start a journey in the history of money and then understand the operation of modern money as this has had a long evolution. Today, we believe that the money has always had the same shape and the same importance together with the debt. When in fact, in the past, there have been many different forms of money. And knowing the origin, you also get to understand what are some fundamental aspects in modern banking. The history of money shows, in fact, since its origin, how there has been a covert struggle for control of its ownership through the form of issuing. Today, we start then a long journey to go into the details of this story, come to understand among many episodes of this column that there is something deeply wrong. What are the recurring errors in the current monetary system and economics? Today, in fact, the money is private. While once with a barter we had worked just one time to produce the good to exchange, today we work 3 times because we have used the medium of exchange, which is the private money of the banks, and then work the 3rd time to give back this money. But it has always been in this way. Many facts and a lot of information on what are the origins of the monetary system have been hidden for centuries, and they ended up getting lost so much so that there are a few centuries certainty about money. We know with certainty that barter and credit were an early form of exchange. For credit, however, we mean a very different form from the current credit. This was possible only within the same community or a civilization well structured through simple accounting record, something like a give and take for the goods traded. Initially oral and controlled by the elders of small community, and then with the development of writing in more complex society, thanks to the special delegates. This form of credit did not include the debt for a medium of exchange, but only pay for goods received. Needed a strong confidence as that which take place in a small group or by the state, but it was not always applicable. For this, the direct barter was joined to these recordings, in particular in commercial transaction, where it was not possible to use the trust between different communities, no link to each other, and in particular with the development of the trade. It was also preferred in the trade of goods exchangeable immediately, where the goods were ready to consume, while credit was used in those trades in goods that at different times, particularly seasonal. Initially, they exchanged goods found in nature or produced directly by man, both agricultural or artifacts. Barter was so direct, but the inconvenience of such system led to the establishment of real reference selected according to requirements such as the ability to transport, the divisibility of the goods, and the same intrinsic material of the good used as intermediary in the exchange. Surely the most used goods were cattle for the exchange of some importance, and the seeds for the small exchange, with preference for wheat seeds, cereals, all those plants most useful to human nutrition. Even the salt come later to be part of these assets for the transaction in trade. These goods were then used in the intermediation of the exchange as unit of measure with which to calculate the value of the production to barter. These had in all the properties of portability, both for cattle and for the seeds, of divisibility for seeds, and in the use of useful material in both. From this property recognized stemmed the convention of induced value of these assets as a mean for a transaction. Since barter is then passed to a first form of money archaic, established not by the law, but by convention and universal recognition, derived directly from the use, intense and anthropological, of some goods of reference as cattle and seeds. The most important consideration that we can highlight by this birth of the primordial form of money is that it was not derived from a debt, but from the work of man, which was created in this way, their own medium to spend in trade. The system was widely used for thousands of years, becoming part also of those who had the legal system as the first civilization gathered in the city-state from Mesopotamia. In this jurisdiction, were also provide loans as this good in case of necessity, in which was provided also a form of interest, but quite different, however, from the present one, in which the interest cannot physically generated. Alone in livestock or seeds, once these goods were being used for agriculture or breeding, have generated new seeds and new livestock, effectively creating the new money and with it the interest to be able to repair the debt. The modern money state certainly cannot conceive a new calf or a new seed, and the same can be said for the metallic money of the past. We will see later what problem will create the new situation. Meanwhile, this society had already developed the first form of loan and interest without having to resort to the use of gold and silver, then regarded as the only possible form economy. This primordial monetary system of good reference, despite being disconnected from the concept of money, managed to create the first economic civilization complex in history and to keep up the birth of Jesus Christ and behind. Example are the soldiers of ancient Rome were paid in salt until the Augustan era. Hence the current term salary, and yet managed to subdue the entire known world. Gold as payment for the armies was introduced by the first emperor only. In the old monetary system, using gold and other precious was a state relation to the religion offering in the temples, which over the century managed to amass a large amounts of these metals without, however, putting them back in circulation for their use in trade. The close link between gold and precious with religion and the construction of idols suggests this use at least up the Iron Age, dated around 1500 BC. In ancient texts, we use gold as offering to the temple or achievement for the kings. At the same time, the use of cattle, salt, and plants in payment of debts or in the purchase of goods. Clearly, until the advent of real currency trading system, however, already well developed, it could function without the need for a real money. It had therefore offer on payment to the temples in both precious metals and goods from natural source, such as the cattle or grain. But in a civil society, there are no traces of this use of metal for transaction, at least officially, until about the 7th century BC, through perhaps This date could be brought forward by a few hundred years, but not behind the 12th century BC. In many texts, we then reference to payment made in wheat or livestock, a sign of the use of these goods as a form of money for transaction, and them as a measurement for the calculation of the value. This point is of fundamental importance in the definition money. Subsequently, with the advent of bronze and iron, utensils are also produced with this metal become part of these assets in conventional transaction. In the change of the monetary system from real goods of reference to precious metal that took place during the whole of the first millennium BC, we can then develop a scenario quite certain, where the priestly class and the temple were holders of large amount of gold, in contrast to its lack of availability for ordinary people, for individuals productive of the time, mainly farmers and craftsmen. Instead, then, between a monetary system of exchange of goods in a monetary system based on precious metal, the major holders of golds were the religious class, without, however, having to obtain this benefit through work and production, but only for the privilege of representation in the name of the gods. Note that in this process of monetization of gold, the system of lending at interest did not undergo change, leading to serious imbalance in the monetary system. As seen, in fact, as a debt in cattle could be easily paid off over time with the birth of new animals, or in the seed with the next collection of seeds, the same could not happen with precious metals, metals that certainly could not conceive as good reference a new being living. So at the official birth of money gold, this was already concentrated in few hands, without those they had acquired the property by the production of trade. There is therefore a logical link between the system of primordial goods reference, very effective and based solely on the production, and the coinage. The first Western currency, according to Plutarch, it seems were minted in Greece without the imaging of an ox on a single face, probably in Athens, around 1260 BC and 700 BC, about in Lydia, according to official historiography of monetary economists. This last official date of the birth for the coin, if it were established, immediately reveals the problem concerning the property of gold and its issuance. Just 100 years later, in fact, Solon had to introduce radical monetary reform, as the system based on gold had soon led to a collapse and debt largely for the farmer and craftsman. For those reasons, concentration of power and not conceivable interest. There were some monetary reforms to realize the gold monetary system, owned by a small group of people and source of debt from the outset. Initially, as happened in the system of good reference, the value of the gold coin was minted entirely conventional. Indeed, the first Greek coin were printed with the symbol of an ox on the obverse, indicating that the value of that piece of gold was equivalent to that of an ox, a really good reference for the first monetary system. It is therefore to be considered that this may have marked the first induction of the value for the currency in history, subsequently developed by Oriti only in the 20th century. One indication of this induction is very important in the average weight of the coin in the first period, the Talaman, for example, corresponding to approximately 8 grams, or about a weight of 130 seeds of wheat, equivalent to the value of a cow in the good reference monetary system. This conversion between seeds and livestock was in use for thousands of years and was taken as a reference for the transition to gold, confirming the induction and the monetary convention expressed in recent time by Auriti. The currency origin would not have had so behavior in the value of a commodity, subject to the demand pool law, not contrived, as they want the economist, but that of the induction and the convention. There was not to refer an intrinsic value of gold, because the value was subjective, induced, and conventional. The gold coin was then compared to the measure of the old system of good reference, such as the livestock or seeds, and used for the best feature of transport and divisibility than a cow. In the transition between a monetary system of real reference to a metal coin coined by the state or by the temple, it should be noted, however, that the system based on gold has moved to control the amount of money from goods that can be generated and controlled by the individual citizen to one manageable only by a central power. As with these goods of reference, the farmer could determine individually the amount of money depending on the use made for seeds and an ox. With the gold, the amount of money supply, not regenerable independently, pass under the control exclusive of holders of precious metal, who, in this way, could decide the economic flows increasing or contracting the money supply in circulation. Taking the reference date on 7th century BC, we can begin to outline how initially and up to the 6th century BC about, the coins were minted in the East only in gold, and only later was introduced the silver in the West. The Eastern system was then exported to the West, but here, as first, the ancient Greece and later Rome were the first stars of an historic struggle between money as unfair debt in a small quantity decided by holders of golds and treated as a commodity, and that one abundant and regulated by law with high circulation based on a model which recall the previous system of good reference like livestock or seeds. Every Greek city and nearby Lydia, today Turkey, had its own currency spendable only within the city, while the temple had also banking function, with loans charged by the 10% of interest per year. The latter receive a percentage of tax, as also acting as means for the state in the city, and also 10 of the largest temple in the Mediterranean Eastern Basin joined in a single treasury around the 418 BC. The function of mint and monopoly and money were thus completely preserved by temples, real owners of precious metal. The marketability of money to just inside the city limit was required by law to prevent the leakage of metal. The introduction of silver became probably necessary to limit the power of the holders of gold, a few aristocratics and religious who had in debt Greek city, much to enslave many farmers So for the debts accumulated and almost cancelled this class of workers. The situation was so serious that required special legislation by Solon, despite the introduction of newly minted silver, that results still manipulated by the oligarchy. He had therefore not only set a new silver coinage, not scarce as gold, but also set a policy for the control of a minimum price for agricultural products and the abolition of slavery for debts, resulting in the liberation of slaves and the return of property sales to the farmer, apparently defrauded by the unfair system. He also decreased the weight of the coins and increased the money in circulation thanks to the silver obtained from Corinth. If we take as a reference the birth of money date in 1200 BC, Plutarch describes here in Parallel Lives the Lycurgus monetary reform in Sparta in the 8th century BC. Lycurgus forbade the use of gold and silver, coining in their place iron disc, rendered fragile by a bath in vinegar, so that they did not have an intrinsic value for it, cannot be used outside of that monetary system, establishing conventional value by law. The name of this coin was Pellanor, and was basically a disc of about £1. The system will be in place for at least 3.5 centuries, coinciding with the peak of Sparta, before returning to the use of gold and silver. Once again, with Sparta, it highlights how the money was only a convention to be established by law, with the value determined by the circulation and absentance. The pellanor was a form of numisma, a word today referred erroneously as numismatic collectors, which actually once called for the study of economy and history of currency. It is derived from the Latin numisma, but derived as well from the Greek nomos, that indicate the law in the administration of the city. It was shown to indicate the currency in Latin according to Aristotle, as he specified the term numisma in the 5th book of the Nicomachean Ethics, as a definition for the value of money as a measure of wealth and not wealth. Aristotle used the word that show how this term that indicate the currency had its origin in the law. In all commodity, a change must be able to compare in some way. It is to meet this requirement that men have introduced money. Money constitutes in a manner a middle term, for it is a measure of all things, and so of their superior or inferior value. That is to say, how many shoes are equivalent to an house or to a given quantity of food. It is therefore necessary that all commodities should be measured by some one standard, as was said before. And this standard is a reality demand, which is what holds everything together, since if men choose to have wants, or if they once alter, exchange will go on no longer, or will be on different lines, but demands has come to be conventionally represented by money. This is why money is called customary currency, because it does not exist by nature, but by custom, and can be altered and rendered useless at will. It's the proper thing if for all commodities to have their price fixed. This will ensure that exchange and consequently association shall always be possible. Money then serves as a measure which makes things commensurable and so reduce them to equality. If there were no exchange, there would be no association, and there cannot be exchange without equality, and no equality without commensurability. Therefore, it is impossible for a thing so different to become commensurable in the strict sense. Our demand furnished a sufficiently accurate common measure for practical purpose. There must therefore be some one standard, and this upset by agreement, which is why it is called customary currency. For such a standard makes all things commensurable, since all things can be measured by money. It is clear that before money exists, this is how the rates of exchange was actually stated. 5 beds for 5 houses, since there is no real difference between that and the price of 5 beds for an house. This was for Aristotle's how Aristotle described the money in his book. For him, therefore, money is a measure and agreement ruled by the law, not a commodity. The definition of nomisma, as dictated by the Greek, will be decisive for the delegation that Rome sent to Sparta to study the monetary system, and not only for the Latin term numisma, from which then will be derived money, but above all for structuring the Roman monetary system that will bring the city to dominate the known world and establish a foreign trade that are so complex as to be equivalent for many centuries later. Roman system, which will be dedicated the next section. Greetings to all, and see you in the next episode. If you like it, you can donate some money for my research, visiting my blog on www.danielepace.blog.uk.blogspot.co.uk. Thank you very much.